We're gonna go ahead and get started now.
Daisy, I think your mic's doing that weird thing.
Is it
Oh,
really?
now it's not. Cool.
Okay. I don't know. I'm okay. You can hear me. It doesn't sound like a robot. Good. Okay. Awesome. Um, all right. My name is Hadiza Saadu. I am the Small Business and Nonprofit Specialist at the Kansas City Public Library. And today I am joined by my colleague Miranda, who is our Wikipedian in residence. And today we are going to be presenting two pieces of open source software that can help creatives and artists with anything related to their marketing or even um, aid in the actual creation of digital art if that is the inclination of the person. But we're really going to focus today's time on how to use these open source pieces of software. Um, we're going to start off defining open source. What is it? Where does it come from? And then we're going to go into a live demonstration of the first piece of software, which is called GIMP. And that is a photo editing tool. And then we're going to go into a live demonstration of Inkscape, which is basically a digital drawing tool. So, Miranda, if you'd like to blow up the PowerPoints and we can get right into it. Right. So, what is open source technology? Miranda, did you want to lead that off?
Yeah, I can do that. So what is open source technology? Open source technology is any kind of software that's coded by a bunch of people online, not just like one or two people, and it's not patented, right? So that the source code, which is the underlying structure of like most websites and most types of software, is free and open for anybody to use. So what's really important about this for this presentation is that all of the software we're showing you today is free and open for you to use. And if you know how to code, you can add to the software, you can customize it, and do whatever you need to do to make it your own, as opposed to like stuff like Adobe, which is really expensive. This is totally free.
So, I am not super well versed on vectors and rasters, which are primarily used in Inkscape. But
I can talk
Miranda
about
here, if
it.
you want to, okay, you can go
Yeah,
ahead.
I'll skip.
Yeah, if you wanted to.
So Inkscape and Gimp are the two softwares we're going to show y'all today. Inkscape is primarily like a design software similar to Adobe Illustrator, and Gimp is like Adobe Photoshop. So it's like a lot more image editing. But the two types of computer graphic softwares that like are like the main types are vector and raster formats. And these can seem kind of confusing, but basically Inkscape runs on a vector format, which means it's a type of computer graphic software made up of unique points and shapes rather than pixels. So the shapes can be like more like organic and they can like fit in better together, and it like is really good for 3D modeling and things like that because you can zoom in and you can continually zoom in like infinitely, and it won't like pixelize. So working with vectors is really great for making logos and large scale artworks because you can blow them up on a billboard, you can make them really tiny, and they'll stay like the same resolution no matter what you do. Um, Common file formats for these, this is like when you're saving your file, are SVG and AI. AI is specific to Adobe Illustrator, but when you use Adobe Illustrator, you're often working in vectors. So that's like familiar to some people. But this is basically really good for like logos and stuff like that. And then raster is a type of computer graphics software that's made up of pixels, or what's called a bitmap. So they're like little squares. And this is what most photos and digital paintings are made of. There can be more like nuance with your value and your design using these raster files, but there's a lot of like detail loss and kind of like bit loss when you scale up. So common file formats for this are JPEGs and PNGs. PNGs are honestly better for saving different drawings that you make and different things like that because it doesn't compress your file as much as a JPEG. But they're both good. A lot of people are more familiar with raster files, especially if you're doing stuff on like Procreate or stuff like photography and stuff like that, because you can only zoom in so much before the real world is like pixelated. And then when you're using like a laser cutter, you use both of them for different things, right? So there's all sorts of different ways you can use these to do different things in design.
So, because a PNG file is technically higher quality than a JPEG, doesn't that mean then that a PNG file would take up more space on a computer?
Not sure
At
how
least that's
much
I
space it
believe that's
takes,
the
but
case.
yeah, I would think that you're probably right.
Yeah. So just keep in mind when it comes to the file formats that you save, like make sure that you're looking into basically what the trade-offs are between the different formats, whereas JPEG might be let me go back. Whereas PNG doesn't compress the image as much, it might take up more space on your hard drive. But then JPEG wouldn't take up as much space. However, if you're trying to do more manipulation as far as like sizing goes, you're going to lose the quality pretty quickly. So there's trade-offs as it goes with technology. All right, so thank you so much, Miranda, for that rundown of vector. I almost said vaster, vector and raster. I've seen the word raster before, but never really understood what it was, and I think that really like cleared up a lot in my head that I just never bothered to learn, and just was like, oh, that's just what that is. So like Miranda has been saying, GIMP is a free and open source piece of software that uses raster as the image editing software. So you can basically, um, you could draw a line, I guess, between GIMP and Photoshop. And you could say that GIMP is like kind of like the free version of Photoshop. It does a lot of what Adobe Photoshop can do. There's a few things that GIMP can't do that Adobe does. And as far as the, I guess, user friendliness of it, GIMP does have kind of a steep learning curve. But it's great because once you get over that learning curve, there's a lot that you can do with GIMP before you shell out a bunch of money, if you ever shell out a bunch of money. And I guess if you did do that, my suggestion to you, if you wanted to go the Adobe route, would be to share a subscription with people. Okay, so let's get into GIMP. This is a tool that I have used a lot in my own practice as an artist. I am a musician and I have created a lot of different flyers for shows. So just an overview of some of the basic functions that you can do with GIMP. You can add text to an image. You can invert the colors of an image. You can chop up an image by cutting it up or cropping things out. You can select part of the image. And there's actually, I can't remember exactly what it's called, but you'll see it in a second once I open up GIMP. But you can select part of the image in different ways and manipulate different parts of the image based off of that selection. You can use the painting tool or the drawing tool similar to Microsoft Paint if you used that growing up. And then you can adjust the brightness, contrast, and saturation, or things that I think fall under the category of vibrance. So those are some of the basic functions that you can use with GIMP. I'd also like to just point out, if this is something that people are interested in or have wondered about, GIMP can also help you create a web page. Um, and if you're interested in that, I am more than happy to meet with people one on one on how to do that. Or I could maybe get into that a little bit. But before I go down that rabbit hole, I'm going to go ahead and just stay with the basics. And I'm going to start to share my screen once I have GIMP open. All right. So I'm assuming you can see my screen, Miranda? Awesome. Okay, you guys can see this image of this hibiscus plant that is looking up so majestically at the sky. This is an image that's just available through Creative Commons. And so I'm going to go ahead and do some of the basic functions that were listed on that slide. And what I'm going to start with is I'm going to go ahead and add some text, and just so that you guys can see how it works. And I apologize, my settings on my computer are on high contrast, so it probably looks a little bit different than it would on other people's computers, because the bar up here is dark instead of light, so I apologize for that. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to go over, what I can do is I can either go over to this window here that has all of these icons and click on this A for the text tool, or I could go up here if I'm more text oriented, no pun intended, and I could click tools and then select the text tool down here. So there are two different options if you want to use any kind of tool that is available through GIMP. So again, we're starting with text. I'm going to select text from the tool drop down. And what happens then is, if you can see, I've got this crosshair looking cursor on my screen. And if I left click, then it pulls up this window here, this text window that shows the default settings of the text tool. And I still have I'm still clicking, I'm still doing the left click. So if I were to let that go, it goes away. So let me do that again. It's back. And now I'm gonna drag this crosshair over to the right to create the box. So what I'm basically doing right now is creating a text box. And so we default to these text settings where the font is sans serif, the pixel size is 62, and the color is black. So these seem like okay default settings. Let's see what it looks like if I type into it. I'm just gonna name this hibiscus to the sky, whatever that means. And I'm going to adjust this text box so that this is all sitting on one line. I don't really like this font, to be super honest. I'm somebody who really likes, am I going to say this correctly? Mono, is it mono? It's something with the word with the prefix mono in it, but the example I can give is the font Courier, or like monospace type, if that makes sense. So like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe monospace type, the spacing stays consistent between the letters and just the spaces. So, or maybe I'm wrong with that. But this is like basically typewriter font. And for some reason, it just pleases my senses to see this kind of font. I like other kinds of fonts as well. Maybe this font doesn't fit super well because it's like a pretty flower. It should be a more elegant font, but maybe I'm getting too in the weeds. But you see where I'm going with this. You can play with things. So let me go back to this font and show you how I even got here. So I knew that I liked Courier. So this is kind of going to show you why GIMP is what I would say a steep learning curve just for the general public, because if you're not already kind of like in that coding mindset, it's a little counterintuitive how some of the tools work. So as you can see here, I have deleted everything in the font box here. But what if I don't know what font I want to use? You can start typing. So you can start with A, and then you see a drop down of all of the fonts that start with A, and you can see a sample of what that font looks like to the side. So I'm looking through, none of these are really sticking out to me. I'm not really into any of these. Let's go to B. Let's see what's in B. Ooh, okay, a lot more options. I think I want something more like cursive. So let's just see if I can find one that I like. Cursive or something italic. One of the two or both. Maybe we should do Book Antiqua Italic. Okay, so I've changed the font setting, but as you can see, I've clicked somewhere else and now it's gone back to Courier. What is going on? So the trick here is, if you want to change the font, start off with the default. It was on sans serif, but I changed it to Courier. And if you want to change the font, the best course of action that you can take is to type out whatever text it is that you want to type out. Then go ahead and highlight it, and it'll look kind of weird. This is the weirdest highlight I've ever seen. I'm used to it because I've used GIMP a lot, but it's going to highlight it by basically creating rectangles around all the different letters and the spaces. And then go back to the font box here, and there was one that I liked in B. I can't remember exactly what it was called. Let me see if I can find it again. It was Book Antiqua, that's what it was. Book Antiqua Italic. Let's go back. Ooh, I think that fits a lot better. Okay. And then there's other things that I can do to change the text. I can change the size by either clicking on the top or bottom arrow, top to increase, bottom to decrease. I don't know. I have actually never used these two boxes here. Let me see. But this is to change the kerning of the selected text. And this is to change the baseline. I am going to tell you that I don't know what kerning is, but I'm going to click on this and see what it does. Okay, so what that seems to be, it has to do with the spacing in a way, if you can see. So essentially what I'm trying to do here is show you how to play with GIMP, even if you don't know what everything means. You can still figure out what the thing is doing, if that makes sense. So whatever kerning means, when I increase it, it stretches the text out. And if I decrease it, it compresses it so that the letters are pushing up against each other. And then if it's at 0, it is what it was at the beginning. So there is a question in the chat. Space between the letters. Thank you, Miranda. Awesome. Okay, so one last thing I want to do with the text before going on to the image. I want to change the color. Ooh. If you've ever played around with Microsoft Paint for hours and somehow gotten into the color wheel, selection, then this might look familiar to you. If you haven't done that, don't worry. It's okay if if you've never seen this before. Um, for beginners, I would say start with the left-hand side here. Um, it's essentially a color map, and what you see here is the selection on the color spectrum, and then it's like different grades, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm even using the correct terminology, but what we can see here is this is started off at red. So I could change this on this spectrum over here on the right side of this rectangle. That's this spectrum that's showing red, black, and white, and the grays. So if I were to start here at the top of this spectrum, you might have noticed that the color here has changed slightly. If I drag this down, you can see more of what I mean. So we are just dragging this through the color spectrum and then getting the different color values of that specific point on the spectrum, if that makes sense. So I know that I wanted to just make that text white, so it really doesn't matter where I drag this on the spectrum. What I'm more concerned with is where the cursor is within this rectangle. And so if I want white, if I just keep the cursor all the way on the left top corner, that's where I'm going to get the white value. And then once I've selected that, we can see that over here in this box, this reflects our first selection. What I also want to point out here is the HTML notation. If you're like, I don't know what HTML is, I don't want to learn, don't worry about this. But if you are inclined to kind of dive into this is one of the beauties of this tool and other pieces of open source software. You kind of get a bit of a primer into HTML notation and other coding languages. So what this is telling us is basically in the HTML language, what is white? White is F, 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 F. That's the best way I can describe it, but essentially what this is a hexadecimal figure. Is that the word to use? A hexadecimal figure, which is what HTML uses to basically code different colors. So I don't want to get into that rabbit hole, but FFFFFF equals white. And I believe, is it 0000000? That's black? Okay. And then we can test that if that's actually true. So that's white. Let's go and see what black is. Oh, that's not quite black, but that's black. So we were correct. Black is 0000000. And then if you wanted to figure out, ooh, what's this grade of turquoise? It will show that as well, which can be useful if you are trying to apply any code to like a website, or if you're trying to match a color scheme. There's all kinds of applications for that. So let me get out of that. I bet you didn't think there was so much to text. I certainly didn't think that when I first started using GIMP, but there's a lot. I don't know if anybody here ever was on Neopets, but I think of GIMP and open source similar to, I don't know what Neopets is like these days, but I liken open source to Neopets back in the old days, where you could customize your Neopets profile by taking code that you found on other websites and jazzing up the background. So I learned a lot just by playing with Neopets back in the day. And this is sort of like the next step from that, I think, in some ways. All right, hibiscus to the sky. That's the text. Now I'm gonna play with the actual image. And so again, this is another thing that's like kind of annoying about GIMP. I think I'm going to retire the phrase steep learning curve and just say things that can be annoying when you're starting to use GIMP, that can throw anyone off, just because of the way that it's set up. Okay, that right there is annoying. Should just leave that. Um, I'm trying to get out of this tool, right? So I kind of have to just go to a different tool. Either that or I need to go to some like filler tool that isn't going to change a bunch of stuff if I like accidentally click on stuff. So what I mean by that is just knowing what these different icons are, or alternatively, knowing where to go in this tool drop down so that you can kind of like rest, if that makes sense, before you get into the next thing. So what I want to do is go into the selector tool or the move tool. I always get those two confused. So this is the tool if you see over here, hold on, over back here on this icon window, I am going to click on this tool that kind of looks like a plus sign, but it's really in arrows. And now I have selected the move tool. So if there are any objects in this image that are free to move, I can move them now. And the only objects that exist right now are these two layers, which are the background and then this text layer. So let me go ahead and click on this text layer and see what happens if I move this. Oh, there, we run into another annoying thing about GIMP. I'm gonna just Control Z so that this goes back to the original position. So let me pause and explain what I just did, which doesn't seem like I really did anything. What I was just trying to do was take this tool, the moving tool, and manipulate the position of this text to a different part of the image. When I tried to do that, what ended up happening instead was I moved the background. If you can see that. That's what I call one of the annoyances of GIMP, something that you just kind of have to play with over time and figure out what works. So I moved that and I want it to go back to the original position it was in. So after I moved it to wherever, I then went onto my keyboard and I pressed down the Control button and the Z button, and this is for Windows. And then it went back to its original place. Okay, so I just want to move this text. What do I have to do? Again, you just kind of have to play with it and try to get this cursor over a piece of the text itself and not the background, because GIMP is like super finicky and it really wants to make sure that you know what you're trying to select before it does it. It's gonna assume that if it's not quite over a piece of the actual text, it's gonna just do the background. And that's just GIMP. So just make sure that you click on, try to get the cursor over a part of the text itself, and then you will have selected the text. Okay, I'll just put it there. Okay, so I said I was gonna manipulate the image. I know I've just been manipulating the text, but that's the move tool. And because I'm on the move tool, I'm gonna click out of that and just make sure that I don't have it selected. And now I'm gonna go back to this tool drop down. I think I'm a more text-oriented person, so I tend to just go to the tool drop down and I don't necessarily use this window, but it just depends on how your brain works and what's more comfortable to you. Okay, so I am going to, actually I'm not gonna go to the tool drop down. Excuse me, I'm going to colors. And I'm gonna play with the saturation. And so if you're not familiar with saturation. Saturation really is like how much the colors pop. They could be dull or they could be super vibrant. So on this scale here, we start at 1. If I go all the way to the left, oh, nothing has happened. Why is that the case? Because I have something that I don't want selected. I have the text selected, so it didn't really do anything. So I'm going to cancel, and now I'm going to go back over to this right-hand side that I haven't really talked about. And the main things I'm really worried about here are under this spacing bar here and this opacity bar. I'm looking over here at these two icons or thumbnails that are representing the two layers of this image. The background, which is this hibiscus flower, and then this text layer. So I want to manipulate the background colors. So I need to make sure that this layer is selected. So now that I've made sure that that layer is selected, I'm going to go back to colors over here. And I'm going to go back to where I was, which was saturation. And now I'm going to play with the scale. Okay, so I started off on the left-hand side. Okay, now we see what we were really trying to do here. So when I try to drag this all the way to the left-hand side, if I didn't know what saturation was, now I know that if I were to go on to the left-hand side of the scale, the 0 value gives me a gray image, a grayscale image. So what if I were to drag this all the way to the right? Oh, now I have a super vibrant image where the original colors are even, they pop out more than they did originally. So that is saturation. I can also mess around with exposure, which, if you're not familiar with that term, it has to do with the level of light that is introduced to an image. And right now my computer is not responding, which might, okay, never mind. I'm going to play with this exposure level here. I can use the arrow or I can just drag this. So if I drag it over to the right, as you can see, the image gets more distorted. There's more light introduced to the image. And then if I drag it to the left-hand side, this corresponds to, if you're using a camera, that it's the aperture, like the opening and closing of the hole that allows light in. So if it's all the way to the left, then it's just black. There's no light. And then black level is just the amount of, like, the intensity of the dark, if that makes sense. So let's see. Still dark. Okay. So those are two things that you can play around with color. There's so many other aspects of GIMP that you can play around with. But essentially what I wanted to show was just some basic functions that you can use, and more so within those functions to be able to apply to the other functions that you can explore. I just wanted to show you my process of kind of like trial and error, figuring out how to use GIMP. Because like I said, there's a lot of things about GIMP that are annoying and finicky that you just kind of have to figure out as you go. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there and let Miranda share their screen to show you a little bit about Inkscape. Hold on just a second. I need to open this back up. All right, there we go.
Sweet. Thank you for that, Hadiza. I learned a lot about GIMP. I still need to download it and cancel my Photoshop subscription because it's so expensive to cancel it. Oh my gosh. But anyways, I'm gonna, it's like more than the monthly payment. But Inkscape is the software we're gonna be talking about now. We just learned about GIMP, which is a raster software for image editing and stuff like that. Inkscape is gonna be a vector software. Again, that's like you can zoom in as much as you want. It's free and open source. It's great for creating logos and scalable drawings. It's similar to Adobe Illustrator. Yeah, so in Inkscape, you can do similar things to GIMP. You can add text, you can create some shapes and move them around. You can use the painting and drawing tool. You can zoom way in and your lines will still be super crisp. You can use the fill tool to change colors. You can write like different calligraphy kind of letters, and you can change scale and rotate objects. These are some of the basic things you can do, but on their website, they have like probably hundreds of tutorials of people that have just done different things. And I think GIMP's website is similar. So if you have a question, it should have an answer for you. A helpful thing with Inkscape especially is having a drawing tablet. And those, again, those like aren't free, which sucks, but you can do some stuff with a little mouse or like one of those plug-in mice. The Wacom tablets are really good drawing tablets that connect to your computer. And I think if you like have an iPad or another kind of tablet, you can connect it in some way. I haven't figured out how to do that yet. So we're gonna make some bad drawings today. But let me share Inkscape. Sweet. So I downloaded Inkscape today. It took like 15 minutes to download and kind of set up. But it's free and they have instructions for downloading on Mac or Windows or Linus. So whatever you use is cool. You can, this is like the beginning menu. You can create a new document. Let me reshare my screen. Awesome. So this is Inkscape. It looks similar to the GIMP interface with the tools all around the edges and the canvas in the middle, but I don't have a photo in there. You probably can upload a photo and draw on top of it. I'm sure that's a thing. But here you can do all sorts of things like make stars, and the colors are at the bottom, but those like hexadecimals that Hadiza was talking about are like pretty universal for like a lot of printing companies and a lot of different like software. So you can just Google a color that you like and it should show you the hexadecimal and you can add that in. But there's also all of these colors down here. You can change the color of individual stars, and the stars are infinitely scalable. So you can make them as large as like a town, like whatever, whatever size you want. There's some shapes. You can do a lot of 3D graphic stuff with this. Vector software is also really good for like CAD and 3D modeling, but I have always been bad at that. I'm sure if you're good at it, you can figure it out, and I'm sure you can learn about it on YouTube. But they have spirals and these little pencil tools and pen tool. This is the calligraphy tool. You can change the color. And then you can kind of group your objects together. So there's a tool called Group and Ungroup, and I think GIMP is similar, where if you have multiple objects, and objects by that I mean like groups of text or groups of shapes or whatever, you can combine them and move them as one instead of moving each one individually, which is really helpful. I think you can do that shortcut by doing Control G. And there should be a move tool also, but I think you have to select multiple ones. So I'm holding down Shift and clicking on all of my things, going to Control G, and now they are one group that I can move around however I want to. And to ungroup them, you can just do Control U. Those should be in this little top panel as well, but I am an image and shortcut person and not a text person, so just doing the controls. You can fill objects. So I'm filling these little spirals. There's like a spray paint tool, but I couldn't figure out how to, oh, there it is. Does these weird little comma things. And then you can erase. You should be able to erase. Let me erase earlier. But anyways, I'm gonna zoom in so you can see how it is infinitely scalable. Just go in there. These lines are like crisp forever. And that means that it's going to be really good for logos and different things like that. It's pretty straightforward. You can add text also, similar to GIMP. But my text color is off. Similar to GIMP, it does annoying things. You can change the font, and it will have them listed out for you, so you don't have to search for them alphabetically. I like Century Gothic. You can move it around. You can transform your text, so you can make it bigger. If you hold down Control or Command while you're making it bigger, you don't warp the text. But if you want to warp the text, you can totally warp the text. And there's this little point tool up here. Because it's a vector, each shape is made out of like a bunch of different points, like infinite amounts of points. So you can like click on it, like click on, I think there's a red thing or something. You should be able to like drag the points. Yeah. So you can warp your points. And you can change rasters to vectors and vectors to rasters. I think it's easier to change rasters to vectors than vectors to rasters, but both have like pros and cons. There is some loss of whatever file you're doing. For example, like if I'm hand drawing a logo, I'll scan it in, and then you can like automatically trace it with like a tool. And then you have this logo that looks like less detailed than your hand drawing, but you can customize it with these specific points. Kind of make it curved. And if you're using a laser cutter at all, the laser cutter will follow these points and cut out shapes for you. So this is like a really kind of helpful thing to know if you do any sort of work with those kind of tools. I think it's pretty straightforward, but if there's anything specific you want to see, I can demonstrate. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I can, yeah. So now we have this beautiful logo for our business. My small business is, I don't know what we sell. We haven't decided that yet. We have a podcast though, so obviously we're going somewhere. Does anybody have any questions? I know that was like fairly brief, but on Inkscape's website, you can learn a lot of different tutorials, and I can show that really quick. Let me new share, stop share really quick. Cool.
Yeah, now I learned a lot about Inkscape. I've like been intimidated by Inkscape because I know it's vector based and I didn't go to graphic design school, so I don't know what to do with any of that. But that just like really, maybe I'll use Inkscape now, just to like make something from scratch.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. I'm terrible like at vectors. Like I got a fiber degree, but I did laser cut one time, and then I learned the difference between vectors and rasters, and it was helpful.
Your demonstration of Inkscape actually like reminded me of a specific tool in GIMP. If y'all don't mind, I want to share my screen again. That it's a selection tool that is actually super useful. That I'm like, you know what? It doesn't make sense not to present that because it's super useful. Let me just go back to this image. I've got this super, I guess, blown out hibiscus flower. What if we
For your
wanted to
poetry
just,
book.
what if we wanted to just select this hibiscus flower and like, I don't know, do whatever we wanted to just the image of the flower without the background? Maybe we wanted to cut it out. Maybe we wanted to duplicate it. How can we do that? So there's an awesome tool. Oh my gosh. And I've been in Adobe for like the past year, so I haven't used GIMP in a while. So I had to remember that it is the intelligent scissors. Where is it? Selection tools. Oh my goodness. I'm like, come on. Okay, so in our tools drop down, we've got our first choice with this, which is selection tools. This is an important function if you want to create like sub images or new layers from different parts of an image or cut things up, move things around, whatever, or even just manipulate one part of the image. There is the rectangle select, which you can just use and select a rectangle portion of the image and do whatever you want with it. It's really easy to use. You select it and then click and drag, left click and drag, just like the text box sizing. But I don't really want to do that, so I'm going to Control Z. I'm going to go back to Tools, Selection Tools. There's also the Ellipse Select, which is like the Rectangle Select. Then there's the Free Select. There's the Foreground Select, Fuzzy Select, Bicolor Select, and then Intelligent Scissors. I use Intelligent Scissors the most. And I like Intelligent Scissors because what you can do with it is start selecting. You just start with one point, and I want to just do this whole hibiscus flower. So I'm going to just keep going, left-hand side. And as I'm going, I can just go. It doesn't, you can't really tell right now if it's like what's happening, but it's like, maybe you can tell if I go like this. As you can see, from the point that I have made on this image, it's kind of coming up with like the, what is it? The mean, the average between the two, and like trying to figure out where I'm going. So I was a little bit off. But if I stay close enough to the hibiscus flower, it's going to more or less, depending on how busy the image is, it's going to snap to what I'm trying to select. So that's why it's called the Intelligent Scissors, because it's essentially anticipating where I'm going, and it's doing so by a lot of different things. I'm not an expert on what the whole process is. I'm sure it's like an algorithm, but you want to, the way that you have control over this tool is by making sure you're as close to what you're trying to select as possible. That way the tool doesn't get confused by what you're trying to select. And so the more points that you do, the more precise it's going to be. And it can be pretty tedious, I'm not going to lie. Like, this can be annoying, but it's pretty accurate. And I will say this is where Adobe definitely does run circles around GIMP, this particular tool, the selection tool. But Adobe is also not perfect. But with this tool, if you want to adjust any of the points, you can just drag them and then it'll adjust. Ooh. But be careful because you might just make another point. All right, so I'm going to keep going around. Okay, let me back up. If you want to adjust any of the segments, you want to actually click on the segment itself, but be careful because that will create another point. So you just want to make sure that what you're selecting is the segment itself. Otherwise, you're just drawing another segment, if that makes sense, like to elongate the selection instead of adjust it. Okay, I'm still going. So I'm not done with how I use this tool. It is still in process, and you're gonna understand why I said it that way in just a second. Okay, I'm gonna try to get this all the way over here so I don't have to do a bunch of selections. Oh, that's good enough. Okay, I'm gonna get that over there. Okay, this is good enough. This will do the job. Okay, awesome. And these are really small and little here, but I'm not gonna be super precious about it. All right, because I can go back and adjust this more later if I want to, but the main priority is to get the majority, just basically get the selection and get everything that I want within the selection included in it. So I'm almost back to where I started. If you recall, I started with this point right here. And now what I need to do is I need to basically close the loop. So once I get back to the first point, I hover over it, and it might be hard to see on your screen, but when I hover over that first point, it shows two circles interlocking, So what it's telling you to do is go ahead and please click me so that we can finish this selection. So once I've done that, I've closed the loop and I have one more click to do, which is to click within the selection, inside the selection. And before I click within the selection, what I can see hovering over it is a dotted circle. So once I actually left click within the selection, then it actually selects what I wanted to select. So I'm going to go here and use the cut tool under edit. And as you can see, I have cleared the space of the hibiscus flower by cutting it. When you cut something, you want to do something else after you cut it, you're either going to, well, the only thing you're really going to do is to paste it. So you can paste or paste into place or paste into selection. I'm going to just paste. And when I just paste, it creates a floating layer that I can select and make it adjust. A floating layer is, for the purposes of the rest of our time here, it's basically a layer that can't do everything that a real layer can do. So let's try to make this a real layer. I'm going to go ahead and Control Z. And then I'm going to paste again. I'm going to paste in place. So what's happened there? Another floating layer. I've right-clicked on that layer, and I'm going to go ahead and edit. No, I'm not going to edit that layer attributes. I'm going to... I want to create a new layer that's a full layer from that selection. And this is where we've come to a stuck point with GIMP. So I'm going to Control Z again. And this time I'm going to try a different paste. I'm going to paste as. I knew there was a selection within paste. I knew it. Okay. I'm going to paste as a new layer. So if you want to paste something after you've selected it and cut it, if you want to paste it as a new layer and not deal with the floating layer, whatever that is, the weirdness there, we are going to go to paste as. And we're going to select new layer. And now I can do a lot with this new layer. Now we have 3 layers, 3 pretty much fully functioning layers. The background layer, the layer of the selection that I cut and pasted into a new layer, and then the text. So if I go back to this hibiscus flower, and if I were to take this eye and click on it for the background, then we can see that this is indeed its own layer. And if I were to also take the eye off of the text layer, we can see again, that is its own layer. And I'm gonna go ahead and stop there. Thank you so much for joining us, Elaine. The recording of this will be made available shortly and will be sent to all of the registrants who signed up for this session. If you are interested, please make sure to sign up for Open Source for Creatives Part 2, where we will be discussing these tools more in depth and introducing some other ones. Alrighty, thank you again. My name is Hadiza Saadu, and you also heard from Miranda Pratt. I am the Small Business and Nonprofit Specialist, and Miranda is our Wikipedian in residence. And that is the end of our time. Thank you.